Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today's video is on Laura, the film, the classic film Laura. It's a film noir, 1944, and I'll get into talking about it in a few minutes. But before I do, I really want to talk about the reading I did for the Kentucky Derby. And it... Well, as I guessed, West Saratoga didn't have a snowball's chance in hell, but I can't help myself. You know, I kind of root for the underdog. However, at the last minute, when my husband and I were watching the game in our hats, he said, "Hey, we could, bet online," which is the first time in our lives we've ever put a monetary bet. So of course I put $2 on West Saratoga. I knew it wouldn't win, but I figured I don't care if I lose $2, right? And I also put $2 on another horse that I thought was a better bet. So I put $2 on Sierra Leone. And my husband picked Mystic Dan based solely that he liked the name. That was it. That was all he did. No work, no cards, no nothing. Well, of course, Mystic Dan won, and he won $100. I'm only out 4, so what do I care? But anyway, I do want to take a look at these cards because I think it's interesting. I personally find it interesting. Now, it's not necessarily reverse engineer, but to just reevaluate a spread after you know the results, because I think it's a way of learning. A lot of people say, they don't appreciate it. And I think calling it reverse engineering is probably not accurate because we're not reverse engineering. But when I look at it, it's how you learn, man. What were my mistakes, or how could I have seen it differently? How could, that's how I feel, and that's how I have become proficient in seeing multiple possibilities for something. Is once it's over, take a look at the cards and see how it really played out, and see how those cards related to how it really panned out. Okay, so let me flip the camera and we'll talk about the cards. Okay, now interestingly, the first little thing I did was I pulled one card before I pulled these, and I just asked for a number clue. And the number clue was the Hanged Man. And in the context of the question, which was a horse race and which horse should I bet on, or which horse would win, I took it, since I asked for a number clue, I took it to mean number 12. And as of Thursday, when I did the reading, because I wasn't able to do it sooner than Thursday, but in a horse race, things change. The number 12 horse at that time was West Saratoga, as you see, right? So based on Thursday, West Saratoga was number 12. Now, as it turned out, when we turned on the pre-race, we saw that West Saratoga was no longer card number 12. It was card 13. Now, when I saw these cards initially, I said, oh, something's going to happen to horse number 10 or gate number 10. Maybe they'll get scratched or something like that. And then I couldn't quite figure what the Queen of Batons represents, and I'm still not sure I do. But I think, given what happened, was that the card that I pulled for a number clue, all the cards showed me was that there was a change of fortune. I was seeing it as the number 10 gate, but really it was the meaning of the card, which was a change of fortune or a change of luck. A change of luck, perhaps, I should have continued to see it. A change of luck from horse number 12 could have been scratched or could have been changed to horse or gate number 13, which it was. I have no idea what the woman here represents. And the quint card for that row ended up being the Magician, which I interpret it to be something that happened behind the scenes. We don't really know why whatever horse was scratched was scratched. That, it wasn't, I didn't hear anything about a horse being injured or killed or dying or anything terrible like that. It was just, for whatever reason, a horse was scratched. And it was probably something that went on behind the scenes that I'm not aware of. And my my numeric clue card is the one that had a change to number 13. Now, also, when I did the reading, West Saratoga had the worst odds. I mean, it was like the losing horse in the whole category of horses. And I'm not using proper horse language or race language because I'm not proficient in that language. But from my understanding, the number 12 card, and the thing that made me want to pick West Saratoga was because when I interpreted number 12 in the context of the race, I saw 12 as being delays, right, hanging around, being slow. So I immediately said, horse number 12 is the slowest horse at that time. And so, it was definitely the slowest horse. And at that time, he had the worst odds. So I took it as number 12 horse is the most delayed horse. And that's why I kind of picked him, because he was the underdog. That's, I just picked the underdog, that's all. I knew we didn't have a snowball's chance now, but I did it anyway. But it's interesting because as the day progressed, and by the time we put on the pre-race, he went from being in last place to being somewhere in the middle. So from Thursday to Saturday afternoon, West Saratoga went from dead last place to middle of the road, which is another and that really, I think, probably only has to do with how many people are betting on him. So, and he had a cute little story, well, not a cute little story, but he had a story about an owner who believed in his horse, of course, and the man who owned the horse, Larry, has really gone through it, and so he was the horse that was everybody kind of like, well, not everybody, but a lot of people were just rooting for him, and hoping he did good for the sake of the owner. So I guess that is what, prompted people to put a couple bucks on him, and I just did anyway, because I would always go for the underdog. But so by the time the race began, he was no longer the least. He might have been the slowest horse in the race, but he didn't have the worst odds. And at any rate, I take it to mean there was a change of luck with the horse I pulled, number 13, which I thought meant maybe number 10 horse was being scratched, but I think really what it meant was he was turning. If I look at it backwards now, with hindsight being 2020, a way I could have seen it was that there was a change of luck for this horse, and now he was gate number 13, which is what he was. I still don't know what the Queen of Batons was. I'm not really sure. It could have had something to do with who he was replaced, with who was scratched and who was put in, but I'm not really analyzing the horses that actually ran at this stage. It's irrelevant. And then the reason that the adjustment was made was something that was behind the scenes. But he still didn't win. And the question was, which horse should I bet on? Which horse is the winning horse, And, so I think sometimes this really does illustrate that the universe doesn't necessarily think it's our business to know something. This is what I need to know. Maybe the universe, and this was for me. This wasn't a reading for anyone else. This was a reading that would only really have meaning for me. And I think the universe understands that I like to pull for the underdog a lot of the time, And so this being a horse, and maybe it knew that my husband's horse would win, my husband's horse would win. So I would still win, because at the last money, he put money on the horses. So my husband's horse won. So it didn't matter if mine won or not, because I still won indirectly, But at any rate, it's fun, and I think it's worth looking at the cards. Okay, so let's get to Laura. So Laura is a 1944 film noir, and it is on TCM until May 15th. I think it was 15th or the 14th. So it's on for the next few days. So if you would like to see the movie before you watch this video, pause this, go watch it for the next hour and 45 minutes, and then come back, because I don't want to ruin it for you if you've never seen it before. The film was directed by Otto Preminger, and it starred Gene Tierney as an ambitious young businesswoman, Dana Andrews, who is a police detective by the name of McPherson, and Gene Tierney was the main character. Her name was Laura. Dana Andrews was Detective McPherson. I forget his first name. If it comes to me, I'll mention it. Clifton Webb was a character's name, Waldo Lydecker. Judith Anderson is Laura's aunt. And Vincent Price was a guy named Shelby Carpenter. Now, it's based on a story written by Vera Caspary. Clifton Webb, his character, is the voice that begins talking. And as he tells a story, like a novelist, which is what he was. He was either he was a novelist, and he had a column in the paper, and he had a radio show. So he was an extremely influential person of the pen. And the film opens up with his voice as the camera scans his apartment, and we see that it's a lovely apartment, extravagant apartment. And we also take note that there's a man who we later learn is the police detective McPherson is eyeing the objects in this apartment. Clifton Webb's voice, Waldo Lydecker, tells the story like a novelist. While his voice is reading, we see that a detective is waiting for him to finish his bath. So Lydecker made the detective wait in his living room while he was finishing his bath and taking a sweet time about it. When he notices that the detective is starting to touch some of his extremely expensive items, he calls the detective, "Don't touch my stuff," because he can see through a crack in the door. And the detective goes into the bathroom where Lydecker's been hanging out all this time. Lydecker, when asked where he was on the evening that a woman named Laura was murdered, he takes out a sheet of paper, which he had typed while he sat in his bathtub, because he had this elaborate table where he could type with his typewriter. That's apparently where he did a lot of his writing. He read his alibi, which was prepared. Lydecker claims he wrote it all down because he is the most misquoted man in America. The detective questions Lydecker about the murder method he used in a novel, in a plot, and said it was very similar to the way Laura was killed. What about that coincidence? But Lydecker, keeps us cool, and, it's just a coincidence. And when McPherson asked Lydecker what his feelings were about Laura, he said in his own words that Laura made him want to be a better person. Kind of like a line that we got from As Good as It Gets with the Jack Nicholson character, right? This, he says basically the same thing. So when McPherson asks him, well, did she make you a better person? His response was, let me put it this way. I would be sincerely sorry to see any of my neighbor's children devoured by wolves. And if you know Clifton Webb, then you know how he delivered that sentence. So it's kind of funny. Together, after Lydecker gets out of the tub and gets dressed, they go to Laura's apartment. They go to the apartment of Laura's aunt. Her name is Anne Treadwell. And when they go to her house, the aunt claims to have adored her niece, and she was one of the people who identified the dead body. We learned that Laura was engaged to be married to a gentleman named Shelby Carpenter, who was played by Vincent Price. We discover that Shelby just happens to be napping at the house of the aunt, Anne Treadwell, when the police officer and Waldo appear, which amuses Lydecker. Shelby Carpenter apparently is a frequent guest of the aunt, and we learn through the conversation between the detective and the aunt that she's given Carpenter on more than one occasion, a large sum of money on a number of occasions. The aunt defends her right to lend money to whomever she wants. Shelby unexpectedly comes out of a bedroom, and the four of them are discussing the likelihood that Laura would never have married Shelby Carpenter. And as the three men leave the aunt's apartment, Shelby and the aunt touch hands in an affectionate way that was unseen by Lydecker and the police detective. The three men go to the scene of the crime, which is Laura's apartment. Shelby slips a copy of Laura's key into her drawer, which no one knew he had, because he claimed he did not have a key to Laura's apartment. While at Laura's apartment, Shelby conveniently slips the key in a drawer of Laura's. And the detective realizes that Shelby put the key there because the day before, when the police came to do a surveillance of the property, there was no key there. During this time, Waldo instructs the detective, who he considers to be crude and, low life, right? That Laura wasn't a dame, because apparently a couple times in conversation, the detective refers to women as dames, that kind of thing. So Waldo corrects him and says this woman was not a dame. And you can tell she was a high-class society woman, because her apartment was equally as lavish as Waldo's was. The next scene is at a restaurant. And the flashback story of Laura's life and how she met Waldo begins. It was a confrontational first meeting when Laura approached him with a portfolio of her work. She was an artist, or she was in the ad business. Now, we're supposed to swallow the pill that she wasn't even 21 at this time. She was an accomplished enough girl, artist, that she was actually working for a posh ad agency. But she goes up to him while he's eating a meal at a restaurant, and she wants him to endorse her pen. And he's rude to her and says, you're disturbing me. Go away. I have no time for this trivial nonsense. And she was offended, and so she tells him what she thinks about him, that he's extremely rude, and she takes off. Now, I guess based on the fact that she was Gene Tierney and just gorgeous, he decided that he was interested in her, and maybe he admired her spunk or whatever. So he goes to her place of business and agrees to endorse her pen in order to give her clout within the agency. And at this time, they begin a close friendship and collaboration. Through Waldo's eyes, we learn how Laura climbed to the top of her field. He described her as having innate breeding, but that she deferred to him in matters of taste. So he definitely advanced her career, and she was smart enough to know it. And he liked having her on his arm. She was a trophy. I think he saw her like that. She was beautiful, she was classy, and she was all the things that he thought he was, Plus she was nice and she was sweet. And so I think he thought that she lent, the people who criticized him for being harsh, if they thought she liked him, it seems to me that by virtue of his association with her, she did things for him socially, as well as that he did things for her socially. He introduced Laura to influential people. Tuesdays and Fridays were their days where they spent private time together in the evenings, until 2 days in a row, Laura canceled their plans. Once seeing that it was over a man caller, she made an excuse that she couldn't see him. Waldo made it his business to go kind of spy, and he went and he stalked her apartment, and he saw that she was home because the lights were on, and then a man went by the window, and so he realized that she was up there with a man. So he found out who the man was, and he destroyed the gentleman's career by writing a vicious article in his column. So that was the end of the guy's career, and when that article destroyed the gentleman's career, she was no longer interested in him. But for some unknown reason, and unfathomable to me really, she became romantically entangled with Vincent Price's character, Shelby Carpenter. They met at a party, and he seemed to have impressed her, and she gives him a job at her firm. Of course, this infuriates Waldo. I think what did I say his last name was? His last name was Jacoby. Did I call him something else? I'm sorry if I did. His last name was Jacoby. Lydecker. Oh, wait. No. His last name was Lydecker. I misquoted a name. So, of course, this infuriates Lydecker, Waldo. And it just got to him that she would fall for somebody like Carpenter, and it really was astounding to me too, because he had about as much sex appeal as a wet noodle, But at any rate, Waldo does some sleuthing on Shelby and discovers that Shelby has been having an affair with a model in Laura's agency, and her name is Diane, and furthermore that he had a criminal past. She says to him, well, I hate you for being so nosy and everything like that. And I'm marrying him. That's how Lydecker finds out that Laura's marrying Shelby. So that was the straw that broke the camel's back for Lydecker. So he tells Laura, well, not only is he having an affair with Diane at this moment, he's having dinner with your aunt. So together they go to her aunt's apartment, who is another woman Shelby has been having an affair with. Shelby is there, and Laura decides to go to the country for the weekend to clear her head about her engagement with Shelby Carpenter, because, even if she thinks Lydecker was a cad for spying on Shelby, she knows he was right. So she goes to the country to clear her head. So she breaks her Friday plans with Waldo and says, I'm going to my country house. I'm not going to be able to hang out with you on a regular Friday night. That takes us to the events leading up to Laura's last evening. The detective holds himself up in Laura's apartment to get a sense of the woman, because Laura said that she was going to the country, and yet we learn that a woman, presumed to be Laura, of course, because she lives there, was killed. And the aunt had identified the woman as Laura. So as the detective holds himself up in Laura's apartment to get clues and get a sense of who the woman was, and clues about who might have been there, and just trying to piece what went on there, he begins to fall in love with the woman Laura was. Obviously, I have notes. The detective, McPherson, talks to the maid and concludes that Laura was with someone else that Friday night when she was supposed to be in the country. So just, the way that she told Lydecker that she wasn't available one Tuesday before, and he spied, she again broke plans with him on Friday night. And apparently she was at the apartment. Just as he comes to that conclusion, just as the detective comes to the conclusion that Laura was there with some other person, Waldo shows up again because he saw the lights on, just like he did before when Laura was in her apartment on a Tuesday evening that she canceled plans. This time he shows up with Waldo, Shelby, and the aunt. And they have a drink together, and they talk about divvying up Laura's estate. And Waldo is concerned that he gets the items that he gave her back. He said, I gave her a very expensive vase, and I gave her this very expensive clock, and I want both of them back. And the detective tells all three of them to leave. And McPherson basically kicks them out. And he stays in that apartment. And he clearly begins to fall in love with Laura. He sits in front of a portrait of her. Of course, she's beautiful in the portrait, and he's sitting in a chair drinking alcohol, and he passes out, he falls asleep. And I think McPherson pops up one more time. After the trio of them left, and he says to McPherson, "You've fallen in love with her. You've fallen in love with a corpse." I think that happens too. So finally, McPherson is alone. Waldo left, the trio left, and he's woken up. As I mentioned, he's sitting in a overstuffed chair. He had a glass of something, and he was fell asleep looking at her portrait. When somebody enters the apartment, and it's a woman, and McPherson, who adjusts his eyes and sees the woman, and he realizes it's Laura. So, of course, they're both confused because Laura doesn't know who this strange man is. Apparently, she has no idea. She didn't have any news. She said she didn't read the newspaper. Her radio wasn't working, so she had no idea what was supposed to go on. And he had, of course, identifies himself as the police. And he shows her the newspaper that says, well, you're supposed to be dead, right? And now they know that a woman who must have looked an awful lot like Laura was killed in Laura's apartment while Laura was not there. Laura goes into her bedroom with McPherson still there. She goes because it had been raining, and he says, go change your clothes, you're soaking wet. So she goes into her bedroom to change her clothes, and when she comes back, she says, I found clothes in my closet that don't belong to me, but I recognize who they belong to. They belong to this woman named Diane, who was a model at my agency, which, if you recall, was a woman that Shelby, the man that Laura is engaged to, is having an affair with. And when we see a picture of Diane, we realize that Diane looks an awful lot like Laura. Now, remember, Laura was supposedly the woman was shot in the face, so it would have obliterated, it would have obliterated too many details about who this woman was. And of course, in the 1944 film, I failed to mention in the beginning, there was no blood and gore. There was no yellow tape. This apartment was so pristine, you'd never know anything happened in it, but that's the magic of Hollywood. He drills Laura because he's, well, why weren't you here? Where were you Friday night? Why were you away for the weekend? And she tells him, well, I went away because he wants to know why did you were supposed to be engaged, to be married. Why would you go away by yourself the weekend before you're getting married? And why did you do that? And he says, because, Diane, the model, was in your apartment with a man, and he recognized that it was cheap booze, so it couldn't have been Waldo, because Waldo would never have drank cheap booze. He surmises that it was Shelby, because he knew Shelby and Diane were having an affair. So he realized that Shelby was probably in the apartment on Friday night with Diane, who he realizes had to have been the person that was murdered. So McPherson leaves Laura in her apartment that evening, tells her not to call anyone and do not leave the apartment. But of course, as soon as he leaves, the first thing she does is she picks up the phone and she calls Shelby, who is the man she's supposed to be engaged with, and together, they agree to meet someplace. Now, the police officers, the detectives, were tapping her phone, so they were made aware of the fact that she made a phone call, and they know she made a phone call to Shelby. Shelby is not shocked when we see Laura make the phone call. Shelby is not shocked to hear Laura's voice because, after all, he knows he's the only one besides the murderer, who he may have been the murderer, we don't know, but he is the only one who knows that Laura wasn't the one that was killed. But he didn't speak up. He didn't tell anybody that Laura wasn't killed, because if he had, of course, it would make him look like the cad he is, that he was there with a woman in a negligee, right? Okay, so next scene. Shelby is at Laura's cottage in the country, and the detective follows him. He had what's the word when you follow somebody? And catches him when the detective walks in and sees Shelby there. The detective sees Shelby reaching for a rifle that was on the mantle, Laura's mantle, and so he questions, why are you taking the rifle off? Do you have something to do with using that rifle? Because it's the same kind of rifle. It's the same type of weapon that would have killed this woman. And he tells him, I know you were there with Diane. Okay, I know you were in, Laura's house. And Shelby gives a cockamamie excuse for why he was there with Diane. Of course, it was all innocent. Forget that the woman was in a sexy lingerie. He recalls that when McPherson grills Shelby gives the story that somebody came to the door, and it wouldn't look proper for him to answer it at that hour, so he sent the woman to answer the door because he's a coward and a cad. He wouldn't want to, if anybody's reputation is going to be sullied, it's going to be the girls, right? So when Diane opened the door, somebody just blows her away. And so that's how, that's what Shelby's story was. While they're in the country cottage, McPherson turns on the radio just to see if it worked, because remember, Laura's excuse for not knowing any news was that her radio didn't work, and the radio worked. McPherson returns to Laura's apartment, confronts her, knowing that she went to the country to think about whether or not she should marry Shelby. One by one, her friends arrive. The maid, who doesn't know, she was a devoted maid, the maid does not realize that Laura wasn't the one killed. And when she sees Laura, she has a, so to speak, a heart attack. She didn't really have a heart attack, but she was shocked, very shaken up. Next is Shelby, who we know, and everybody, present knows that Shelby was there with Diane. And then Waldo shows up, and when he sees Laura is alive, he faints when he sees Laura. He actually almost had a heart attack, and he said, in my right pocket. So it was suggestive that he was in such a state that he needed pills, to calm him down from having a heart attack. All three of the men argue. Waldo then took the opportunity, while he was recovering in her bedroom, to invite all of her friends to celebrate a party that Laura really didn't die after all. At the party, Aunt Treadwell confronts Shelby about how they belong together, but Shelby is cold because now, apparently, he's re-engaged to Laura. Now, the reason they got re-engaged was because he thought she was guilty, because he knew she had a shotgun, and he suspected, well, if Laura thinks I was there with another woman, then maybe she showed up and shot the woman. And she was willing to put the engagement back on for Shelby because she didn't want it to look like he was guilty of anything. So she agrees to call their engagement back on, but she's no more in love with Shelby than she was. But she just agreed to those terms because she thought it would take away any suspicion off of either one of them. Now, at the party, Anne Treadwell, Laura's aunt, confronts, as I mentioned, confronts Shelby and says, we really belong together. We're like two peas in a pod. I know exactly who you are and you know exactly who I am, and that's why we belong together. But he's like, no, I'm going to marry Laura. And then the aunt and Laura end up in Laura's bathroom, which suddenly transforms itself into a posh public bathroom that you would expect, but it's really Laura's own private, powder room, off her master suite. And Anne Treadwell, her aunt, tells Laura that she's in love with Shelby herself, and that she knows that Shelby's a POS, but she doesn't care because so is she. She admits to Laura that she and Shelby were having an affair, and they were both capable of murdering Laura to get her out of the way. I mean, the aunt admitted to being capable of killing Laura to get her out of the way because she wanted Shelby for herself, and that she knew that Shelby was capable of killing Laura, but I don't know what he would have to gain by killing Laura if he was going to marry her, but okay. And although neither of them were guilty, she tells Laura, I'm not guilty, but I thought about it. At the party, McPherson arrests Laura. Waldo tells Laura that he'll buy her the best attorney that money can buy, and he'll write about her virtues in his column and on his radio show so that no one will believe that she would have been capable and that she'll get off scot-free. McPherson sets up a fake interrogation to question Laura. Laura has an answer for every question regarding the radio, for example. She claimed, my radio didn't work because it worked when you were there because I had a repairman come in and fix it, that kind of thing. And McPherson, without a warrant, breaks into Waldo's apartment. And he discovers in the clock that he has in common with Laura as one of the things that he wanted from Laura's estate when they thought she was dead. He sees the identical clock. So he smashes the glass of this clock without concern that he's smashing the glass. And he realizes that there's a secret compartment in this grandfather clock. The next scene. And in the meanwhile, McPherson can't, it was a fake interrogation. He didn't think Laura was guilty, but he just gave her this interrogation to get as much information out of her as he could. And one of the things she says to the detective is, I don't know how I ever could have considered marrying him. I'm not marrying him. Waldo confronts Laura and calls her out because he says, you're falling for this piece of this common everyday uncouth, police officer. How could you? How could you? I have groomed you to be an exceptional woman, How could you possibly be falling for him? It was bad enough when you were falling for Shelby, and now you're falling for this guy. So he confesses to Laura his love for her and how long he's waited for her, and damn near confesses that he'd kill for her. Laura asks him to leave, and when he does, McPherson successfully, because McPherson showed up in the meanwhile, McPherson successfully opens a secret compartment in Laura's clock, and then when he opens Laura's, he finds that there's a shotgun that was stored there, or stashed there. They conclude that Waldo is the one who killed Diane. Waldo didn't actually leave, because very convenient to the story, there's a side entrance that no one bothered to check, But Waldo slipped into the side entrance that, when they lock, make sure your door's locked and everything. No, but they never bothered to check the side entrance, right? So Waldo didn't actually leave, and he was loitering by the side door entrance on the inside. McPherson leaves. Waldo enters the apartment, gets the gun that he had stashed in the clock, and while Laura is grooming her hair, Waldo sneaks as I mentioned, sneaks in, grabs the gun he'd stashed, and aims it at Laura. Now, of course, and basically what he says is, if I can't have you, no one can. Of course, McPherson saves the day because at the last minute he realizes that, the guy who was watching for Waldo to leave the property said, no, Waldo never left. So then they realize that Waldo must have still been in the building. So they go running back up. And right as Waldo's about to really shoot Laura this time, they interfere with that happening. And then the gun goes off. It doesn't shoot Laura. And then McPherson, of course, shoots Waldo to prevent him from being able to shoot Laura. And as he's dying, he called Laura the best part of himself. Oh, no. One of the arguments he gives Laura was, I won't stand for you, running around with this cheap detective. You're the best part of me. You're the best part of myself. And I won't stand for that cheap, vulgar cop touching you. And then that's when McPherson comes in and saves the day. Okay, so that's how it ends. So the way it ends is that Waldo, killed Laura. And because he couldn't, if he couldn't have her, he couldn't understand why she didn't love him, why she didn't want him. So, it was bad enough when she fell for one guy that he destroyed the career of. It was an artist named Jacoby. It was another thing he tolerated when she, fell in love with Shelby and was going to marry him. But having her fall in love with this cheap and vulgar detective was just too much. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so that's why he came back. He was, he thought he killed her. When Diane opened the door, he didn't recognize that it wasn't Laura, so he shot her. But then, to add insult to injury, when he realized that she was still alive, it was their second chance to be together in his little sick mind. But when he realized once and for all that she was going to go with the detective, he was like, this is too much. And then he wanted to kill her. Okay, so my question is, what on earth did Laura see in Shelby? He had about as much sex appeal as a wet noodle. Now, we know that Laura never had any interest in Waldo regarding a relationship. It's kind of clear because all the men she was falling in love with, he wasn't one of them. But was she using Waldo? Right? So I want to ask, was she using Waldo? And I also want to know, what did Laura see in McPherson? Because Waldo has a point, McPherson was crude and he was vulgar and he was common, He wasn't the level of man that one would expect a very, I don't want to use the word classy because that's the kind of word a vulgar person would use, but you know what I'm saying? He wasn't the kind of person you would imagine with such a highly cultured and beautiful woman as Laura was. Okay, and I'll probably come up with other questions, as I'm doing it. So those are just the three that I had. Now, the deck I'm using is the Tarot Noir by Matthew Haquier and Justine Turnell. I know I've done other Film Noir movie videos. I never used them for that, but I'm using it for this one. Why? Because this is such an elegant deck. And Laura, although it is Film Noir, it's very elegant. It's an elegant Film Noir. So I'm using it. This one happens to be the first edition. I think subsequent editions have a flower motif, but there's one upright and one, in the reverse so that it accommodates people who insist on not being able to know whether a deck is reversed. But the irony is that it's a pip style deck. So in a way, well, of course, none of the cards are pips as I'm turning to you. It's a pip style deck, so one would ask, like, does it really make a difference? Because when you read this style deck, we don't tend to use reversals. At any rate, now this is a big deck, right? It's not one that I can riffle shuffle. So when I go into my meditative place for fun, the universe knows this is a fun read. And when I do my questions, I'm going to have to overhand shuffle all these cards. I'll probably overhand shuffle them at least 21 times. And then when I turn the camera to you, I'll do another couple so you see that it's a genuine read. So let me go into my meditative place, handle and mix the cards, and we'll get to it. Okay, number one question. What did Laura see in Shelby Carpenter? And I preordained that I would be doing it a 3-card spread. Okay, so he didn't have any money, so this is the king of money. So let's see what some of the other cards say. But it suggests that he had money, but he didn't. He was marrying her for hers. The Fortitude card. And the Wheel of Fortune, with fortune going in this direction. Okay, so let's do a numeric assessment. We have no value for the king. Some people do, but I don't. We have the numeric value for Fortitude, which is 11. And we have the Wheel of Fortune, which is 10. And then the Quint card would be 21, which would be the World card. So she apparently thought she had everything to gain by marrying him, which is really strange. That would seem to be more, I would think that would have more to do with if she had a thing for Waldo, or why she was marrying Waldo. But let me pause so I can get the card. So yeah, I mean, this kind of suggests that their combo, or their pairing would bring power to their situation, or at least to hers, but I don't see that at all. If anything, it brought power to him rather, her standing and her presence. He had everything to gain by it. And here the Wheel of Fortune suggesting a change in luck, and then like being fortuitous. Unless she felt that he was handsome. I think he was supposed to be like a handsome playboy kind of guy, but I guess my own personal feelings are entering into that, because I think like Vincent Price was the least attractive, like sexy guy. I mean, he wasn't exactly Cary Grant, is what I'm saying. But maybe, the willing suspension of disbelief, she felt as though by hooking up with him, it would, make her appear more worldly. Probably she felt she had something to gain, and that the two of them could become a powerhouse, of youthful attractiveness, and I don't know. It wasn't stated, but at one point when she first met Shelby, there was kind of a suggestion that he might have had a title, or he came from affluence, where he didn't have to work. But as a lot of these people with titles, we've learned that the money goes away, and although they have a title, they no longer have the money. And I think it was, there was a possibility of that. And so that there's a possibility that that's what she saw in him. Maybe she wanted the title. If he had a title, I think there's a chance that he might have had a title. So that's it. She was just, looking at him as an opportunity to advance. And it would satisfy both of them. Now, as I mentioned, it was clear throughout the film that Laurie had no interest in but what did she see in him? You know, she dedicated every Tuesday and Wednesday night to be in his company. And why did she retain a close relationship with him? And my intent, because it's the same reading, and since I can't riffle shuffle these, I'm just doing, I don't know, about 7 shuffles. Let's see. Okay, well, Queen of Power. Oh, isn't that interesting? The last one with Shelby was the king of that. So now we have her in that position. Another court card of money. And 10 batons. So that would be the Wheel of Fortune. So let me go off camera and pick the Wheel of Fortune. So I think it's interesting that now she appears in this position where before it was Shelby. We have a card that, although it's, you know, the most dignified of the suits perhaps, but it was still an interesting and exciting path that maybe Shelby had her on, because after all, he introduced her to all the most influential people. He is responsible for her career having soared, you know. So I guess she was using him for those purposes. We have the 10 of batons, which I guess suggests, it could suggest a blockage. It could suggest that, you know, that was the end of what she saw in him. It didn't extend beyond that. And then we have the Wheel of Fortune, which appeared again in the reading we did for Shelby. So I think, once again, she saw those two connections as opportunity for career. That's what I think. So with Shelby, it was a romantic relationship that she thought would make her look more attractive, perhaps. But her association with Waldo, which was not romantic, was, again, to pursue her career. Now, the last question is, well, what on earth did she see in Jacoby? What on earth did she see in the detective McPherson? Now, granted, of all 3 men, Dana Andrews definitely is the most attractive to me of those 3 men. He's the only one that I would have been physically attracted to. However, you know, Laura was a woman of breeding, you know, and he did tend to be crude. So, you know, the relationship seemed on the surface to be, they had the hots for one another. You know what I'm saying? So it'd be interesting to see if the cards said that. So let me go off camera so I can properly shuffle these so you don't have to endure it, and then I'll be right back. All right, now I'm going to do a couple more shuffles so you know. Alrighty then. What did Laura see in McPherson? Queen of Batons, her sexual nature. Okay, he awakened something inside of her. It's exactly what I was thinking. 6, perfect number, harmonious. She fantasized being in a domestic setting with him. And maybe he brought out her poetic side. You know, maybe she just really had the feels for him. And when we do 6, which is the quint number, because the queens don't have quint, we get, oh my God, look at that. We get the Lover's card. So she definitely was romantically interested in him. She seems to definitely have domestic ideas. And he seems like he definitely woke up the sexual part of her and the part of her that was softer, and she wanted to be feminine for him, perhaps. Isn't that interesting? That's very, very interesting. I can't think of any other questions that I would ask. I'll go off camera for a few minutes and think it over, and then I'll come back if I have it. It's already almost at an hour, so I don't know how long you want to endure. Okay, I thought of a question. At the end of the movie, when Laura clearly falls in love with McPherson, and they do kiss at the end of the film. So we do know, I failed to mention that. We do know at the end of the film that they both before Waldo comes back to kill Laura, we both recognize and understand that they're going to be a couple. So my question now is, what becomes of Shelby and Aunt Anne Treadwell? Will they hook up? That'll be very interesting. I'd love to know that. Will they hook up? So we have the Pope, the Chariot. Dang, look at all that. Justice, they're all cards from the higher order. So let's look at the Quint card, which would be, let me get my paper and pen because I don't trust myself anymore. 5 and 7 is 12. 12 and 8 is 20. 20 would be the Judgment card. Let me stop the camera, pull it. Well, I think the Judgment card clearly suggests that they'd have been exposed for who they were, because by now everyone had their number, because they, Anne Treadwell confessed to Laura that they were having an affair, and she and Shelby did belong to one another, and so they really were revealed for who they were, and maybe they went on their merry way, and with that, because this card, the Chariot card, in the context of the question, suggests that they progressed, or they moved, they transitioned into people of power. She was already a powerful woman. She was a wealthy woman, and he had the title, and so I guess they found, and Anne Treadwell wasn't interested in Shelby for any kind of title. She wasn't interested in him for his money because he had none. She just had the hots for him, I guess. She just really liked him. She was no good. She knew he was no good. Perhaps he would come to see the light and to understand that that was really where he belonged. I think there's a possibility that they, based on these cards, that not only were they exposed for who they were, but I think he saw himself as Anne saw her, as Anne saw them. And I think they just continued their merry way together as another power couple. So there we have it. So I hope you thought this was fun. I sure did. And I wanted to make another reference to the Kentucky Derby race. I'm not really sure if I made this point, but when my question was, what do I need to know, or, to bet money on the horse, or I wasn't going to, it was just going to be a gentleman's bet. So it was just, the intent was not to make any money. It was just to do a gentleman's bet with my husband. And of course that plan changed when my husband offered, let me flip the camera. When my husband, offered to me, hey, we can put a couple bucks down, you want to do that. So the game plan changed there too, right? But, I think I've made this point on a number of occasions when I go into my meditative place and ask the universe, what do I need to know? I don't think the universe feels we need to know everything. And I don't know if I made this plain when I was talking about in that portion of this video, but I think, maybe horse racing, and betting on race horses isn't one of the things that the universe concerns itself with. Or if I learn who to bet on, maybe the universe knows in its wisdom that I don't need to be able to predict things like that. Because after all, I don't think I've come close. I've had like placing horses, I've come to having horses that were placed, but more often than not, the message I get is the horse that I think is going to win, or the message I think the cards is giving me is usually always about something about that horse, either scratches, or there's always something about it that, for whatever reason, it doesn't end up, its fate is played out in the cards, but it's not the winning horse. And so I think that's a good illustration for sometimes, when I ask, what do I need to know? The answer, I don't need to know the winning horse, and so that's what I take away from that, which is why, because I recognize that, which is why I would go for the underdog, because I know the underdog wouldn't win, and I wasn't going to get the information from the universe anyway, so I might as well have supported the underdog. I hope that makes sense, and I know most of you won't be here to hear that. For those of you who are, Universe love you. Hit like, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, friends, peace, stay well, be kind, and do no harm.